beautiful exhibit. And Sarah McKeithen will be recording her talk. And without further ado, I am very honored to introduce Andrea Almond to you all.
Thank you, Prudencia. I want to say thank you to Prudence for having the show here in her beautiful, beautiful gallery. And thank you to all my fellow artists who show here in the gallery, who have been incredibly supportive and kind since I joined in 2022. So this is my first show here. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos about how to do an artist talk. And it was all like, don't be boring. That was the main goal. So I thought, well, to not be boring, I'm going to have visual aids. And I was going to bring a bunch of books, and then that just seemed too much. So I just printed stuff out. So I grew up, my father was a painter, an artist. He had a regular job, and he was like a Sunday painter. So I grew up in a house that art felt like it was part of sort of your everyday existence. He was out in the garage painting, and he had art books in the house. And I remember as a child, the first picture that really, like, I could not stop thinking about was like Joshua Reynolds, the Blue Boy. So as a child, you look at this, and he's wearing satin, and he has lace, and he has bows on his shoes, but he's a boy. So I was like, okay, art felt very mysterious and sort of glamorous to me at that point, and it was about clothes, and I was always into clothes, so I'm all in. Okay, so that was sort of my very first memory of looking at art. And after that, my father also had a close friend who was an artist. He was a plein air artist and a portrait artist. He was born in 1889, so he was considerably older than my father. And he was born in the Netherlands, and he came to the United States. He immigrated here after World War II, and he lived in Taos, New Mexico. So every summer we would go to Taos, New Mexico. My father would paint with him, and here he is, Mr. Vendries, the artist, painting outside in New Mexico. And this was like probably sometime in the 60s. And he was European, so he was very eccentric. We would go to his house, which was just this one big room, and he had cases of wine and music blaring and beautiful women around all the time because he was a portrait painter. Here he is, like on his 90th birthday, like in a bar in Taos. And I remember thinking, okay, this art thing, yeah, like I'm all in again. And then the Kimball Museum opened in Fort Worth in 1972. And so they had a big collection of European paintings, which I had never really been exposed to. Francois Boucher, which, again, as a young person, I was like, what is happening here? But I want to know more. And this painting, which is a self-portrait of, I don't speak French, but I think it's Vigie Lebrun, who was an artist during the French Revolution, and she was a portrait painter, and this is a self-portrait. And I remember at the Kimball thinking, why aren't there more women artists? This was like the only one. So that made a big impression on me. And my mother's favorite paintings at the Kimball were the Dutch still life, which, this was years and years ago. So it's in your brain, but then you sort of forget, right? So at one point, I was living in Dallas and working in a corporate job, and a friend of mine said, let's take this outdoor painting class. It was a SMU continuing education class. And I was sort of going through a hard time emotionally, so I thought, oh, okay. And it was like the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was great because I was immediately absorbed and sort of addicted, which was much better than being addicted to like a tortured relationship. So I started painting, right? So initially, I was very attracted to landscape paintings that involved a lot of color. That, you know, I wasn't that interested in what you think of as like straight up plein air landscape paintings. And I was also very interested in landscape with people. This is Fairfield Porter. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work, but I loved his work. And then an artist, Kim English, who I took a couple of workshops from Kim, and he does a lot of urban landscape, but usually in European cities or Mexico. And he was really focused on that light-dark piece, which was what I was really attracted to in painting. The whole idea of light in the painting. And also another person that I loved his work was Ken Oster, who was a California painter. I took a workshop from him. He passed away a few years ago, but his work was really beautiful and sort of moody. And so I got very, very into urban landscape painting. And I was traveling a lot. I was going to New York, I was going to Europe, to Portugal, San Miguel de Allende, and doing a lot of urban landscape painting. And then I moved here, and I took early retirement and quit my job and got married and moved here. And I always had a studio at my house in Dallas, but here I got a separate studio. So I started spending a lot more time in a bigger space, in a studio, and started making bigger pieces, bigger paintings, and kind of started with we live a block and a half from the San Antonio River, the Riverwalk, so I started making a lot of Riverwalk paintings, and I was very inspired by Wolf Kahn. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Wolf Kahn. He died a few years ago, but he was an East Coast landscape painter, and he really used color to sort of move forward his ideas about landscape. So I found that really intriguing, and I sort of jumped off with that in mind. And then I had knee surgery last May, which was horrible. Anyway, I had a knee replacement, and I had a lot of time to just, I wasn't painting, I was at home thinking about stuff. And my niece, who's 4 years old, Camille, made this drawing of my knee surgery. And I was like, that girl's onto something, because it absolutely encapsulated how I felt. Like, it was painful, it was dark, and she's 4, mind you. She didn't even really know what it was about. So that made me start thinking, I felt like I wanted to start making work that was a little more expressive. And so I started, of course, looking at abstract expressionists, which we all do, like Joan Mitchell. But then I also started looking at some contemporary British painters, Cecily Brown, who uses historic paintings to make work, and Flora Jovanovic, also a young British painter who uses things like the Boucher painting that I showed you earlier, and she jumps off from that. So that brings me to when I started doing this body of work, which the still life paintings. I decided I just really wanted to paint from an object that I was looking at. I didn't want to use a photograph or memory or etc. And I have saved a magazine ad from a painter, Wolf Jordanson, years and years ago, and I saved this like 10 years ago, And then I was like, I remember I never was interested in floral paintings, but I liked that one, so I went back and found it, and then found him online, and he's an amazing teacher and painter in Colorado. And so that was sort of very inspiring for me to do this body of work. And I thought I might talk a little about 3 or 4 of the paintings, and then I'll be done. I read a quote about some work that said it wavers between holding onto an image and letting it go. And I wanted these paintings to not just be observed, but more felt. So that was sort of what I think at the back of my mind when I was going for those. And I think like this piece, which is fade in, fade out, sort of exemplifies that, where it holds on to the image maybe more on this side, and then it sort of lets go of the image on the other side. And I was also interested in the light and shadow piece, but also the idea of, you know, the flowers are so alive and they're blooming and they're beautiful, but then they, you know, this is that same thing here after they had died. And it made me think a lot about just, you know, I called it chaos, because, you know, when somebody dies, it's chaos for you, the people who are left, but then there's still a trace of the person. So that was sort of in the back of my mind when I was making that work. And then these 3 over here, the one on the right is the fresh flowers, and the one on the far left is they're kind of letting go, and then the one in the middle is when they have given it all up. And one of the funniest things, I think, is when people who don't really know a lot about painting or art, they look at your work and they go, how long did it take you to make that? And you're like, 30 years. What? But all of the videos I watched said, talk about your process. So sometimes it takes me, like that piece, Winter Morning, was a piece I started like 4 years ago and couldn't figure out what to do with it. So I just put it up against the wall and then got it out in the fall and finished it. And then that piece over at Claremont Street piece over there, we stayed at a friend's house this summer, and I was going to physical therapy every morning, and that was the view every morning. And I had planned a whole series of those paintings, and then things happened in the winter and I didn't get to it, but it's still in the back of my mind. So that came together really quickly. And this is a piece I started this morning, and this is sort of my process that when I start a piece, just like it was an idea, but notice some similarities. Like, it's so weird how things just stay in the back of your mind. This is also a piece that is not quite finished, but here's Francois Boucher and that sky. Like, that sky was somehow still in my head when I was making this piece. So that's it for my talk. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks, Prudence, again. If you have any questions, of course, fine. So, yes.
How do you know when a piece is done?
You know, that's a really good question. I think that there's just some sort of intuition about it. However, I think one of the hardest things is sometimes when you feel like it's done, but you feel like whoever your audience might be might not feel like it's done. And I can point to that piece over in the far corner, which is called Leaving a Trace. That was a piece that I just felt like it said everything I wanted it to say, but I felt like it really wasn't done enough to put in a gallery. And then I just thought, I'm gonna do it, you know? And so there is a fine line. One teacher I had said it takes 2 people to make a painting, 1 to paint it, and the other person to take the brush out of their hand. So I kind of think that's true to some degree, because you can totally lose the work if you just go too far with it. Can't get it back.
Pam Slocum isn't here, but she had a question to me earlier about your style. And in this case, this sign over here that's got let go, she was curious about your process in doing that.
That is just a lot of like Gamsol, just medium. Like once I put the paint on, and it's like some of the paint is dried underneath, and then I put another layer of paint on, and then a ton of Gamsol, which is, you know, a medium, and then it just drips down.
Do you do your backgrounds first and then put the flowers in?
No, I do it all at once like this. Like it's all one piece, because part of my, I don't know, part of my instinct in making this work was that I wanted to feel like it wasn't a separate thing, like the background and the foreground. I wanted it to all feel very, very connected. And so I kind of do it all at once.
Do you listen to any kind of particular music when you're painting?
Yes, I do. I listen to music, and I also, these two books, if you're a painter or any kind of creative or just a person, these two books are both amazing, amazing books. This is Rick Rubin, Creative Act, A Way of Being, which is an amazing book. And this is Painting and Consciousness by Jordan Wolfson, the painter I was talking about. This is a great, like, small book, but really great book. So, I read a lot of things. I listen to music. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about other painters. I find that very inspiring. So, anyway, if there's no more questions, oh, yeah.
I'd like to take the brush out of your hand on that.
Oh, you would? Okay.
I think that's just
Thank you.
spectacular, just like that.
Okay.
What were your first, what was your first subject matter? Was it flowers?
You mean as a painter?
Your very earliest.
I was a landscape painter, a plein air landscape painter. Like I was doing this kind of thing in Dallas, which is just straight up landscape. And then I started traveling and doing a lot of urban landscape. Like I love old cities, which is really kind of ironic. I ended up in San Antonio, which is a good thing. I spent a lot of time in New York, so I did a ton of urban landscape painting in New York. So really, this work is really recent.
Yeah.
And before I moved to San Antonio and had a bigger studio, I was making much smaller work. So, yeah.
You can see your own evolution.
Yeah.
I had a question about,
Yeah.
when you start, you're doing these still lives with the floral arrangement in place in your studio, and the background is just whatever is in the studio, I guess. So you have,
I had like, I started out with just a white sheet as the background.
you have something behind it.
Yeah, and with a spotlight on it, and just grocery store flowers is sort of my, you know, how I started. And then I did buy some fabric like these that have the sort of turquoisey color. I went to Joann's and bought fabric to use as a background.
Okay, so you do think out the background as it relates to the floral.
Yeah. I
So
can't
this is planned.
totally
So
make
this
it
is
up. Yeah, and I bought black fabric for this.
Okay.
So I could, because like I said, I wanted the work to be observational. I wanted to have that relationship with the object and be in the room with the object. And Jordan Wolfson talks a lot about that in this book.
So these pieces with the predominantly yellow or white?
They were the white sheet.
It's the white sheet, so you kind of improvised a little bit. You
Mhm.
decided that
Yeah.
the yellow would kind of help to pop the.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Indian yellow, my favorite color.
We call it
Yeah.
instant sunshine.
Yeah, instant sunshine, that's right. That's right.
And do you still work from your studio? Now moving back home to work?
No, my husband doesn't like the smell of oil paint. So it's much better that I leave and go elsewhere, so. Anyway, well, if there's no other questions, thank you guys so much for coming.